Okay, we're going to talk about prayer this morning. And the story we're going to look at this morning happened 2,600 years ago in the ancient city of Babylon, which was located in what is now Iraq. And I was going to do a little summary of what led up to this, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to read the first chapter because I can't tell you any better than Daniel could. So Daniel chapter 1 is where we're going to read this morning. Our sermon actually comes out of chapter 2, but this will set up what's going on here. Daniel chapter 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, "I am afraid of my lord the king, who assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to do this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So Daniel and his 3 buddies were among the captives taken from Judah. And they went into Nebuchadnezzar's leadership training program, didn't they? And if they did well, they would become advisors to the king. So the king set them up with a complete training program that included an incredibly rich diet that they didn't want. However, the diet didn't sit well with the 4 young Hebrews, so they talked the guard into letting them eat vegetables and drink water. And miraculously, they ended up stronger and smarter than everybody who was eating the king's food. All of this success creates problems by the time we get to chapter 2. You see, God's blessing had gotten Daniel and his friends into an elite corps of advisors to the king. And that brings us to chapter 2. We're going to read part of chapter 2 now. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanted sorcerers and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Once more they replied, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, There is no one on earth that can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among the humans. This made the king angry and furious, and he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, Why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked him for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes time and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. So King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Some versions of the Bible say that he couldn't remember the dream. But the NIV doesn't say that. Either way, whether he couldn't remember it or he decided he wasn't going to tell his wise men the dream, just to test them. These wise men of the kings were probably used to interpreting the king's dreams. It was easy to come up with some mumbo-jumbo that the king would fall for. But not this time. They had to tell the king what the dream was and then interpret the dream, or he was going to have them all executed. I believe the king could remember the dream, and he wanted to test his wise men, knowing full well that they couldn't tell him what the dream was. But I also believe that after what happened in chapter 1, he really wanted to test Daniel and his friends also. If you go back to chapter 1, verse 18, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. This time, they'd have to be 1,000 times better than the regular guys. His regular guys couldn't fulfill the king's command. They even dared to criticize the king for his unreasonable demand. And their response infuriated the king, and he ordered their execution. I guess he figured if they couldn't produce, they weren't worth keeping. His execution order not included his own wise men, his regular guys, but also the young Hebrew trainees, didn't it? You kind of really got to sympathize with these young Hebrews. It wasn't their choice to move to Babylon. It wasn't through their own ambition that they got selected to the training program of the king. It wasn't because of their own aspirations that they ended up as wise men in King Nebuchadnezzar's court. It was not their own doing that they were in the predicament they were in. It was all God's doing. They were where they were because God had put them there. And King Nebuchadnezzar was really frustrated with his dream. He'd exhausted all human resources, but had gotten no relief. Have you ever been frustrated with a problem and called upon all known human resources? You know, if it was a business problem at a plant, at a factory or something, you know, you might have planned and analyzed, developed committees, sought the advice of experts, bring in consultations and stuff. And if it was a personal problem, you may have sought the advice of friends and family. For some reason, we turn to God as a last resort. You know, I think I've shared with you many times about how I forgot to ask God for help in dealing with Bonnie's abusive cousin one time. And I ended up getting in trouble for it, the way I handled it. I thought I could handle the situation on my own, without God's help. And I'm sure that had I sought God's help in that situation, it probably would have had a much more pleasant outcome. So when Daniel heard about the king's execution order, he went to the king and asked him for more time, didn't he? That he might interpret the dream for him. Then what did he do? Called a prayer meeting, folks. Called a prayer meeting. Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Those boys were praying for their very lives. Do you think they were expecting God to answer their prayers? I think they were kind of counting on it. Folks, when you pray, you must expect God to answer your prayers. If you don't, you'll receive an answer. If you doubt, you'll receive an answer. Chances are you won't receive an answer. If you doubt you'll receive an answer, you probably won't get one. James 1:5-8 says, if any of you, we read this before, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all he does. That last verse is pretty strong, isn't it? That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He's double-minded and unstable. Folks, if you're an unstable Christian, doubting that God will hear your prayer, doubting that God will answer your prayer and give to you what you ask, do you think Daniel and his friends doubted that God would come through for them? They expected God to answer their prayers. You know, God sometimes answers prayers quickly, sometimes not. God answered their prayers that very night, didn't he? You know, there was a lady one time who was rushing to Walmart to buy something. She was having new neighbors over for a dinner. And she was lacking one item to finish the meal. So when she went to Walmart, she got to Walmart, it was pouring rain. And she didn't have an umbrella. And she said, please, Lord, help me find a parking spot near the entrance. Just as she said those words, a car backed out of the first spot near the door. She said, never mind, Lord, I found one. God answered her prayer so quickly she didn't understand that it was God doing it, didn't she? Have you ever prayed about a situation and felt worse about it? I don't think I ever have. You know, our old pastor, Pastor John, used to say that when he got angry, and he generally got angry a lot, sometimes he would put off praying because he knew that as soon as he prayed, it would make him feel better, and he didn't want to feel better yet. He wanted to be mad about something. You know, a few years ago, I was headed into town on Peoples Road, and I came across my neighbor, Jeanette. She was walking. I pulled up beside her and asked her if she needed a ride or something. When she looked at me, I could tell she'd been crying. She'd just lost her mother a few days before that. So I pulled over and I got out and I put my arms around her. And she said, you know, I know my mom's in heaven. She was a good Christian lady. So I prayed with her. I prayed that God would comfort her, and immediately upon saying amen, and I opened my eyes and I looked at her, I could tell that God had answered my prayer. Immediately. She felt better. You know, God doesn't always answer prayers quickly, though. I've got another personal example where my prayers were not answered quickly. Some of you may have probably heard this story. A couple of years before Bonnie died, a rift had developed between Bonnie and Jessica. And it got ugly, and I was caught in the middle. And it was painful. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. I prayed that God would heal this. I'm sure Jess did too. Looking back, I think that Bonnie's brain tumor may have played a role in her behavior. We don't know that for sure. But God answered our prayers, but it cost me my wife. Before Bonnie passed, her and Jessica reconciled, and that was a beautiful thing. Which brings us to the point I want to make about praying persistently. Something that's really bothering you, you don't pray for just one time and expect God to answer your prayers. You want God to work on something for you, fix something for you. Don't just pray once. You know, back in the Old Testament, Hannah, remember who Hannah was? She was Samuel's mother, and she couldn't have any kids. And she kept praying for years for a child. And finally, the Lord blessed her with a son, the prophet Samuel. God blesses persistence, folks. He doesn't like quitters. You think Daniel and his friends prayed just one time? God, help us figure these dreams out. You think that was all they did? I doubt it. Verse 18 says, he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men. It's a wonder they got any sleep at all that night. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they stayed up all night praying. Daniel didn't just take this burden on himself either. He called a prayer meeting. He enlisted the help of his godly friends. Folks, and that's what we do when we call the prayer chain, isn't it? That's what we do when we put certain names and people on the back of our bulletin. We are calling on God's people to pray for this, for those things. Matthew 18, 19, and 20 says, and this is Jesus talking, again, I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them. Folks, we should never underestimate the power of people joining together in prayer and praying for the same thing. You know, during the night the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision, and Daniel praised the God of heaven. Daniel had his own dream, didn't he? And in that dream, God revealed to him the king's dream. Then what did Daniel do? Verses 20 to 23. Daniel said, "Praise be the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others." We need to remember that statement right there, folks, especially in the times we're living in. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Daniel praised God and he thanked him for answering the prayer, didn't he? And in that prayer, he also recognized that God is in charge. We read verse 21. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. God is in control, folks. God is in charge. And God is big enough and powerful enough to grant our most difficult requests. He doesn't grant all our requests, though. If we're asking for something inappropriate or inconsistent with God's will, but just remember that nothing is too big or nothing is too small. Nothing is too easy or nothing is too hard for our God. The God of Daniel. He's our God too, and he's big enough to handle anything. And folks, may we never forget to praise him and thank him when he does answer our prayers. Amen? Amen.